Hello and welcome back. We can take a big, deep breath. We have made it through 1 year out of 4 of Donald Trump's second term. There are more plates spinning now in geopolitics than at any time in my life. And every day it seems to be something new. A new alliance under strain, a new red line that doesn't seem to mean much anymore. And you could say that a war a day is helping to keep the Epstein files away. And he is using weapons of mass distraction. But it does make you ask a bigger question, really, about the system itself and whether it's breaking down. Because when you think about the global order, particularly America's relationship with NATO, when it's America that is the biggest threat to these European nations now, then NATO doesn't really look like a shield or a form of defense, but it looks weak. And you have to ask yourself whether this alliance that defined the post-war world is actually changing into something very different, and whether nations will be approaching it in a very different manner. Before I get onto the main video, I just want to remind you that if you haven't already, to hit the bell icon and subscribe, and that will really help me get to my goal of 1,000 subscribers this year. So thanks in advance for that. So NATO was built on a very simple promise. If one member was attacked, America would step in for defense. And that promise made a lot of sense during the Cold War. There was a clear enemy, the Soviet Union. Europe got the security it wanted, America got the influence, and the global economy was held together by free trade, the dollar, and American military dominance. And it wasn't charity, it was a transaction. The protection was in exchange for the alignment, and the markets in exchange for the loyalty. And it did work. Perhaps it worked too well, and this has bred a lot of complacency from European nations and the NATO nations. I actually have a personal anecdote from a day in which I had the pleasure of being Donald Trump, a role some would say that I was born to do. During my master's degree in international relations, we ran a NATO role-play exercise, and each student represented a member state. And you could say I got lucky. I was assigned the role of the United States, specifically the big dog, Donald Trump. And the scenario that we were set was whether NATO should accept Finland. And it was fascinating. There was lots of back and forths. We were sort of presented with the different strategic missions of the different nations. But what was really interesting, perhaps by the fact that I did choose to play it, not as if it was me as the leader of the United States, but as if I was Donald Trump, was that by playing the role properly to the actual situation that existed under Trump's presidency, by blustering and applying pressure and making threats of sanctions to remove money and protection, which he had basically done ever since he became president towards NATO, was not only did the group accept NATO into the simulation, it also accepted Ukraine. For context, this was before the Ukraine conflict kicked off. But it was very interesting because on the surface, of course, it's just role play from a master's degree, and it might seem a bit comedic. But I think what it shows is that even in a room full of highly educated postgraduate students who knew that this was a simulation, everyone instinctively understood the same thing, that the United States holds disproportionate power in NATO. And that if it's willing to use that power, it can get almost whatever it wants. And that exercise stripped away the polite language and exposed the real dynamic underneath. And that's exactly what we're seeing today with America in its attempt to take greater control over Greenland. Now, it's been a really hectic few months. I've been traveling, I've been to Egypt, and I wanted to take some time off from my goal of getting to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube and slow down and switch off. And I went back to some of my favorite movies, the Godfather movies.
Godfather, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. You can act like a man! What's the matter with you? Is this how you turn out a Hollywood Pinocchio that cries like a woman? What can I do? What can I do? What is that nonsense? Ridiculous.
particularly Godfather 1 and 2, although I did watch Godfather 3 as well. And what struck me was just how relevant this feels now. And Michael Corleone is an archetype of somebody who starts off fairly innocent. Through rising through power, he changes, he morphs into something different.
Don Corleone.
Michael Corleone starts as a patriot. He served as a Marine in World War II, and he wants nothing to do with the family business.
That's my family, Kate. It's not me.
He is very different. He turns up to the wedding in a military outfit when everyone else is in suits. He believes in those institutions of America. His dad openly says he wants him to be a politician, Senator Corleone. He believes that he can help take the family towards legitimacy. But through a series of events, betrayals, threats, pressures, he rises to power by becoming just like his father, just like the gangster he didn't want to become. And in doing so, he changes, but he loses much of what he valued to start with: his family, his innocence, and his moral clarity.
Do you renounce Satan?
I do renounce him.
And all his works?
I do renounce them.
And all his pomps?
I do renounce them.
One of the best lines from that movie is, "I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse."
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
I would try and do the accent, but I think the clip does much better than I can. And that's really what Donald Trump's American diplomacy has become. For decades, the United States presented itself a bit like early stage Michael Corleone, someone with a moral framework, rules-based, institution-focused, multilateral, albeit on the surface, perhaps not as true behind closed doors. But that age of innocence, at least the facade of the innocence, is well and truly over after this first year of Donald Trump's second term. And what we're seeing now isn't persuasion, it's leverage. He started off with tariffs instead of trade deals. He's applied sanctions instead of negotiation. And he's applied pressure instead of partnership. Look what he did with Venezuela. He just took their leader. Iran, he's stirring the pot. And Greenland, well, that issue is ongoing. It's different theatres, but the same method. Donald Trump becomes Don Donald. And if Donald Trump is the global godfather, what does that make Keir Starmer?
I can handle things. I'm smart. Not like everybody says. Like dumb, I'm smart and I want respect.
This isn't about consensus anymore. It's about making offers that can't be refused. And just like in The Godfather, this kind of power, it works. But it does come at a cost. Greenland isn't an isolated incident. It's the logical outcome of a system where power is no longer disguised as cooperation. And it's not just about the idea of flags or sovereignty in the abstract. It's about rare earths. It's about oil, energy, and strategic geography. And it hints at the changing balance in the world order and hints towards a new world order and new rules of the game. Because when resources become scarce or more competitive, diplomacy becomes optional, and smaller players, Denmark, the individual nations of NATO and the EU, even the EU itself, they're reminded where they sit in the hierarchy. And this is the contradiction that NATO can't really resolve. NATO exists to protect Europe from external threats, such as Russia or China. It also exists to allow America to continue to have economic influence and it have markets for it to sell its products. But now when the pressure comes from the so-called protector itself, you can't invoke collective defense against a country that is the defense. And that flaw was manageable during the Cold War, but today it's becoming impossible to ignore. I've done a few podcasts recently about trade, about empire, about the British Empire, even the Dutch Empire. I briefly touched on the Mughal Empire. Empires are the norm throughout history. What's been unusual about this period after World War II is that we pretended we didn't live in one. After World War II, only two empires remained, and that was America and the Soviet Union. And the American Empire didn't rule through conquest. It didn't need to. It ruled through systems. Free trade was a sort of bribe. The security guarantees were the glue. But now that the carrots are gone, what's left is the stick. Tariffs, sanctions, pressures, and offers that can't be refused. And that's where China enters the picture. China's rise wasn't accidental. It grew from a peripheral economy into a global powerhouse in a single generation. And part of that growth was enabled by the United States, by the likes of Nixon and Kissinger, back when China and America shared a common enemy, the Soviet Union. Now China and Russia are aligned, not because they trust one another, but because now they share a new enemy. Meanwhile, China offers its own version of the carrot. They offer cheap products. I was recently in South Africa and there are Chinese cars everywhere. They are very affordable. And it made me question, how are there so many more new cars in economies smaller than the UK, such as South Africa? But that's because China understands that to enable greater allies, it needs to provide cheap products to them. It is also going about providing infrastructure. When I went to Djibouti, there's ports, there's roads, there's railways. And China doesn't offer lectures or morality about how to run your country. And what we're seeing is quietly and not so quietly, the world is hedging its bets. Even the likes of Canada, Mark Carney has openly said about his greater ties for Canada, a neighbor of the United States, is going to have with China. Michael Corleone spends the entire story trying to escape the gangster world, the world of power, violence, and control.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
And if you watch the third film, you also see he has a preoccupation, an obsession with getting an award as well from the Vatican, a bit like Donald Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize. And in the process of trying to be legitimate, seen as a man of peace, in the process of getting out completely, he actually loses all the things that mattered to him in the first place. His family, his legitimacy, and his soul. And I think that's the real risk in what we're watching now. In this desperate scramble for dominance, for leverage, for resources, for enemies to eliminate, America risks pushing away what once made its power sustainable: allies, trust, and voluntary cooperation. Sure, power can force obedience. Countries with weak leadership, which you can see all over NATO, are likely to give in to the demands of Donald Trump. But it cannot force loyalty. And behind closed doors, nations will be looking elsewhere because there are other spheres of power and influence that can also make offers. So my advice to NATO nations at this time is another Godfather quote.
He taught me, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer.
Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. My future questions, based on everything that's going on at the moment. Is the European Union experiment dying? Will Trump serve a third term? Where does the UK sit within all of this? Precariously positioned on the edge of continental Europe, outside of the EU, and a special relationship with the United States. Is the conceptual West over now that there seems to be a serious fracture between Europe and the United States? And will China take Taiwan? Because if might is right, then what stops China from acting like Don Donald? If you have any thoughts, please leave them in the comments. I always enjoy reading comments and having discussions. If you like this video, please like. And if you're a fan of the channel and you want to help me grow, then please subscribe. And I'll see you in the next one.